Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session where we are going through some astrology demo charts. We have another lovely chart for you today, donated by one of our followers on social media, and we will be going through. It was absolutely hilarious for this first section of 10. Like the first 3 or 4 charts were very, very similar. And then they broke the cycle with an Aquarius rising, which is what you have in your chart as well. So it's nice to see that there are both themes in this first section, but also you have a lot of very unique things in your chart that we'll be able to use as an example for people to understand kind of what a true Saturn ruled chart looks like, because you've got a good example of one.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it'll be nice. Okay, so here we are. When we first begin a session, I always like to ask clients what they're interested in. If there's any particular aspect of life, whether it be kind of health and wellness or finance or work stuff or family stuff or relationships or kind of learning and travel, what areas of life are they most kind of concerned about, or that they would like information on right off the bat before we get started on some of the astrology basics?
Probably health and wellness is a big one for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've just embarked on this career of reflexology. So I'm at the very beginnings of it. So yeah, just what the overall projection may be of the career I've chosen.
Interesting. Yeah, for sure. I think it's a really good place to start, but that also gives me a fun opportunity to use a tool that I don't get to use a lot. In astrology, there's a tool called electional astrology or horary astrology, where we use the specific time that an event happens, or when a specific question is asked, in order to look into the energetics of that particular time. And I think that that last question was actually very striking to me, how pure it was. And so it did give me a chance to draw up kind of a chart of the moment to look at the answer to the question, will my business succeed? And what I found really interesting about that chart was it looked very different from this one. And that was a good thing, but it did have something that I'm curious about unpacking. The chart that I drew had the ruler of the chart, Mercury, in the 7th house of relationships. And so one of the things that we see a lot with that particular message to the chart is it will succeed. It just depends on the relationships that you're able to forge along the way. And that the success of your business will actually be very dependent on both the status of your personal relationships, as well as the relationships that you will cultivate with your clients. So it is less a question of, can you do this, or will it be successful, versus who you will do it with and what the status of that relationship will become, and whether or not kind of your networking efforts and your interpersonal skills will be able to save the day.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Very
interesting.
Yeah,
because I'm so far out of my comfort zone right now in networking. I'm on a different planet.
That's a good place to start. Because your chart has a lot of antisocial tendencies, and I think that's a good door for us to open first, because it does reveal a lot of the strength, but a lot of the weakness as well of your particular type of chart. So in astrology, everybody's pretty much familiar with their sun sign. You know, if you're born during a particular 30-day or so period, you are assigned this mysterious zodiac brand, which everybody has their own opinions about the various signs. Some jilted lovers will, color your opinion of various signs for you. Some toxic family members may color you in other ways, and some great connections may color you in certain ways as well in terms of the zodiacal signs that you really resonate with. You have chosen this go around your sun to be in Capricorn, which is a very business oriented, steadfast, passionate, even not fiery passionate, but definitely a motivated, an intrinsically motivated sign. But Capricorn pursues that motivation over time. It's a sign that really is looking at the long game, not the short-term motivation of kind of momentary, oh, this feels good, let me do it. Capricorn is like, no, let's think about the chess answer to this question. How can we look 10 moves ahead, not necessarily just be moving via impulse. And having yours, does that make sense?
It does, because I am always looking at not the immediate, like it's the short-term sacrifice for the long-term gain is typically my mantra.
Yeah. And this is where astrology also gets really fun and funny, because you do have your sun in Capricorn, but we also have the moon to consider. And the moon represents our emotional state and how we engage with the world through a feeling level. And yours is in Sagittarius in the 11th house of friendships, which if I had to pick one of the more charismatic moon signs, that would be it. And it's almost in direct opposition to what Capricorn stands for in terms of Capricorn's kind of long-term vision. Sagittarius is like, is very spontaneous, is very gregarious, is very much squirrel, and just going after those momentary impulses, the quick jolts of inspiration, the sidetracked tendencies of that mutable fire, the fire that spreads. So there is a little bit of that spontaneity that you've had to repress as well, I would think, because it doesn't necessarily match with those long-term goals.
That is exactly right.
And this is why a lot of people read their sun sign and they get extremely disappointed or they get extremely confused, because true astrology looks at the 360-degree view of the person, not just the horoscope version of the sun sign, but who are we on an ego level? Who are we on a heart level? Who are we on a mental level? Who are we when nobody is looking? Who are we in our work? These are all different parts of our personality, different facets of our diamond, and we need to kind of respect each of them and feed each of them individually. So right. I think there is a really happy-go-lucky and almost foolish would be a good way to say it. Not foolish in terms of a bad way, but foolish like the tarot card of the Fool, somebody who's very carefree, somebody who's not necessarily worried about the future. There is a strong part of your heart that is very open and very kind of whimsical would be a good way to say it. But you may have decided to lock that part away depending on how stern you were, depending on how hard you were on yourself growing up.
Right.
Yeah, which can be always tricky.
But in something like that, can that be influenced by protectionism?
Of course.
Right, and that would be more of where I would see that foolishness or that spontaneity being squashed, is that sternness was a protection.
Yes.
To protect that spontaneity.
Mm-hmm. And the story continues, as we make our way through the chart, because the sun in Capricorn is just the tip of the iceberg. But also, it's not just the sun in Capricorn, it's the sun in Capricorn in the 12th house of hidden enemies. And It's one of the more difficult houses to navigate. So when we look at the sun being in the 12th, often there are self-confidence issues in early childhood that are very squashing to the spirit, that are very shutting out to the light. And when I see this, I see, that underdeveloped Capricorn, which can be so weak and so lacking of its strength, because Capricorn really is a sign that gets better. It's at its best when it's 60. It matures like fine wine. It really just gets better with age. It's one of those signs, whereas some of the other signs just get more crotchety.
I like you.
And like when you were younger, that Capricorn wasn't coming through as strong, but that Sag moon was just so giggly, a very happy child, a very kind of rosy cheeked child, but a very impressionable child as well. And if that Sag moon is exposed to too much severity early on in life, that Capricorn can be the ironclad defense that develops around the heart, which can be really, really difficult to unpry later in life, because that Sag moon is so childlike and so vulnerable, and so prone to being extinguished if it's not severely protected. But when you're young and your defense mechanisms aren't as strong, that can be a really sour balance to strike.
Yep.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And part of it is we have this Aquarius rising, which just makes you a really weird kid. And
I was.
yeah, I say that with so much love, because Aquarius is one of those signs that's it's the sign of the scientist, it's the sign of the inventor, it's the sign of that quirky Einstein personality that's just always head in the clouds, but what they're looking at is a million light years away from the rest of us. They just have this this antenna that pierces layers of thought that you can't even fathom. These are the kids on the playground that are just in their own little world. We might think that they're weird, or that they're odd, but really they're receiving information and thinking on a level that very few people can truly understand unless they have those placements. And that's what we see with an Aquarius rising specifically, not just an Aquarius rising, but Saturn, the ruler of Aquarius, is in Aquarius, ruling from the first. It's a very, very potent combination, but especially in earlier life, because Saturn and Aquarius and Capricorn all mature with age. In like 1 to 16, very awkward, very ugly duckling, very malnourished, very odd black sheep type energy, paired with that almost overly enthusiastic moon in Sagittarius, can just be the most precious but most kind of big-footed, tripping over one's steps formation that we can see in early life, because a lot of the strength that you have baked into your chart doesn't really come alive until you hit 30, and then 60, and then 90 eventually.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. So in that, so the Aquarius, so would daydreaming fall under that category?
All the time.
Because I was always daydreaming.
Yeah.
Always.
For sure. Yeah, Aquarius is as fixed air, it always has its head in the clouds. There's no exception. Yeah.
This makes so much sense.
Yeah. And especially, the Capricorn is just one side of it, but especially because you're not just an Aquarius rising, you also have Saturn in Aquarius, the ruler of Aquarius, in that first house. It's so potent, the Aquarius nature of your chart. So if I were to suggest how you would read horoscopes, it would be Aquarius first, Capricorn second, and the moon in Sagittarius third.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
That just turned everything upside down.
For sure, for sure. But at the same time, you know, it feels more correct than anything, you know, you've read before. And that's how good astrology should feel. I tell my clients, you know, good astrology should feel like I'm giving you a tour of your own house.
And that's what it feels like. It feels like, okay, this actually does mean something. It does hold, it's not some generic, you know, this is what's going to happen, yada, yada. Just like, well, okay, it's just a variation of each one of them. So there, it's not really pertinent, but this is very specific.
Yeah.
And makes a lot of sense as I push towards 60 quickly.
Mm-hmm.
It makes sense what you're saying. And so far you've been dead on the money on the stages.
Yeah, for sure. And it's also really easy as an astrologer to look at this and crack the code on these patterns, because Saturn ruled signs always follow this format. They're very predictable in this way. Early life just sucks because it's like they're not used to their machinery yet. You know, they're too big for their britches. Like they need to learn how to human. And that's really difficult when you're also in a weirdly weak growing body. You're in new social situations and trying to navigate those. I even will go as far as with parents who have Capricorn children and Aquarius children, to really warn them, like, hey, this is a very specific type of child that you need to understand will not be behaving like the rest of them, especially in teenage years, as Aquarius gets even weirder and more disassociative, and Capricorn gets even fiercer and even more rejecting of any drop of love you could possibly give it, because it's just trying to build its rock solid armor. You know, there are flavors of that can be a very unique form of caregiving that needs to be utilized on behalf of those two signs in early life.
Fascinating.
Yeah,
absolutely fascinating.
But then, because Saturn works in cycles, and why 30 is important and 60 is important is because Saturn returns to its natal position at the time of where it was at the time of your birth, around those landmarks of life. And so we call them Saturn returns. And for people who have Saturn ruled signs in their chart, these become really monumental turning points of personal growth. They are that way for everybody, but more so when we have our top three in Capricorn and or Aquarius, and you've got both. So it's like life doesn't really turn on. The engine doesn't really turn over. You don't really feel like you're cooking with gas until you make it past that threshold.
Fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking about the age of 30 and what happened at 30 and what I'm doing now, and I'm a year and a bit away from 60.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're not.
So yeah, it's a huge, it makes sense what's going on now on the massive change of direction.
Mm-hmm.
But not a massive change. It's where I was thinking of going back when I was 30.
Right.
But life got in, circumstances got in the way, and I derailed that path.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's fascinating how it's, now it makes sense why 30 years later it's coming back to where I was originally headed.
Mm-hmm. Saturn, a key word of Saturn is refinement. And it's not like you're adding in anything new. It's not like you're changing anything really, except you're becoming more pure. You're becoming more purely you. And you're reminding yourself and giving yourself the permission to be that more authentic version, that more refined version of that kind of, that diamond, that ore, that kind of innermost piece of you that has had to be hammered out and kind of forged through life experience.
Forged through the fire,
Yeah.
as I call it.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, Saturn ruled charts are not for sissies. They are difficult. They are hard. But honestly, again, it's just a different timeline. Like, some people peak in their 20s, and I feel so bad for them.
Yeah.
Because it's, you know, after that second phase of life is when, you know, Aquarius and Capricorn really start to blossom, and they start to embrace their weird. They start to embrace that a lot of the people that they were competing against in earlier life, they've caught up to and they've surpassed them. They've really started to buckle down on their own truth and forget, you know, the truths of others that have either died or that they find out are completely miserable because their lives have gone off in a direction that was not as forethought, not as planned out.
Right.
Yeah. Very interesting dynamic.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Cool. So that's just baseline personality stuff. We've got other parts of the chart that we can kind of uncover as well. Let's see. Where do we want to go next? Let's talk about the work aspect just a little bit in the context of those things.
Okay.
So the 8th house is the house of entrepreneurship, and you've got the ruler of that house as your Mercury in Capricorn in the 12th. And that's a fun way of saying that one of the things that you might be uniquely qualified to do from a entrepreneurship perspective is work at end of life or critical care. So the 8th house, in addition to being the house of business, is often known as the house of death. And when we see the ruler in the 12th house, which is the house of hospitalization, it's often people who work in hospice, often people who work with end-of-life care, often people who work with very deep karmic healing. So it's not as simple as I'm just a reflexologist. It's supposed to evolve into something that's a lot deeper than that.
Right. And that's actually been my sense, is that this is just a stepping stone into the direction. Like, it's rocking towards, it's not done its journey, is, I guess, the sense. Yeah. This is just the launching pad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I might, the word that I might want to plant into your head to have you kind of constantly think about when you're thinking about what next, where do I go, you know, is just deeper, you know, not just sticking with the superficial of, you know, how do I get more clients, or how do I, you know, do the basic business things. It's how do I make a deeper impact? How do I go deeper into the practice? How do I touch my clients on a deeper level, not just staying on the surface?
Okay.
Yeah. But a lot of what you are here to do from a work perspective, from a hands-on perspective, you do have the North Node in the 6th house of health, work, and pets, oddly enough. So learning to master those lessons of being of service, you know. But how you are being of service is in relation back to your moon in Sagittarius in the 11th. It's through community involvement, it's through friendships, it's through bonding with people. So I think that there is another really good vantage point to think about, where if you were to do this kind of deeper end-of-life care, trauma response care, deep kind of chronic illness care, where people are teetering on the edge, you know, of this physical existence, there's almost like this death doula type service that you do for the community that very few people are willing to step up and do, and make light of it and have fun with it at the same time, you know. But it's somebody who fits a very unique service-oriented role that is so beyond the scope of what they label themselves as. You know, you are truly doing a community service.
And that makes sense, because again, I'm constantly being redirected into a trauma service. The past 8 years, 12 years of training, it always has a trauma core, you know, as far as my knowledge base goes. So, and even if I try to go to the surfacey stuff, it always seems to curve back into that trauma base.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think it's a good place for you to kind of camp out. Yeah.
It's making sense. This is making a lot of sense.
One of the things that I think may be informing this trend is your experience with trauma from a family dynamic and from a kind of ancestral line dynamic. You have this this planetary formation of Venus and Scorpio in the 10th house, ruling your 4th house of family and your 9th house of spirituality together. And I think maybe one of the things that life is trying to extract from you is the lessons of hurt and healing that your family kind of brought to the table, so that you can kind of not only publicly share those experiences, but also understands that, you know, healing is our legacy. It's our responsibility. You know, it doesn't just affect us, it affects everyone around us. And if we make space for that, both in our own lives and in the lives of others, then we can really start to cook with that gas. Yeah, so in some ways it's learning the skills to be of service, but it's also using your life experience to inform and to educate and to share, and to hold space for people who may be caught on just a little bit too late.
Wow. Some very profound statements, Sam, in this. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely dumbfounded how much is actually showing on the chart.
Yeah.
That I knew within myself, but it's never been revealed, like written in the stars, I guess is the term.
Yeah.
Because it makes sense. It's my trauma from the past. I've never looked at why me. It's okay, how can I best help somebody, because I have gone through so much. How can I be of service to somebody else to help them through that darkness?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I've always known internally that's what I should be doing. I just didn't know how to go about it. Right?
Yeah. And this is like, you know, putting the astrology aside for 2 seconds and just speaking as like a body worker. This is the essential plight of our profession. You know, we want to make a difference, but we often don't know why we want to make a difference. And we gradually realize through the studying and through the self-care and through all of the work that we do internally that, oh, this isn't just a healing journey that I'm giving to other people. This is also about me. This is also about, you know, me seeking healing and to surround myself and wrap myself in the blanket of those experiences so that it trickles into other areas of my life and starts to kind of let the work on me a little bit as well.
Right. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, breaking. And this is something that we'll also see with a lot of 12th house involvement, because the 12th house is this is this house of hidden enemies. It's also the house of just really deep lineage-oriented karmic healing, and delving into like Cara Duen's cauldron, just like the 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 dark underworldy parts that a lot of people fear to touch. When we see major placements in the 12th, that's where we go, is into that trauma response, that deep healing. And sometimes that means that we are kind of generational cycle breakers, and it's our job to step up to the patterns and give those patterns a big old hug and let them know that it's okay, and let them know that we are equipped with both the vulnerability and the strength to move forward, whereas other generations were not strong enough.
Right.
Yeah. And of course, we sugarcoat it and we give it the name of reflexology, and we say that, oh, touch heals, and if we look at the microcosm, macrocosm, we're using the nerves to affect the various parts of the body, and we give it these layers of kind of holistic meaning. But at the end of the day, when we are doing those deeper layers of work, it's important to understand that regardless of if we were bagging groceries at a supermarket, or if we were doing some other sort of profession, we would still be looking to heal in that way.
Very cool. Yeah, because I've been doing this as long as I can remember, and I've had many jobs.
Yeah.
And I've still always been, my husband thinks that I'm a magnet for trauma, because anybody who's got trauma will literally come up to me and spew their life. And I don't know this person.
Right.
But there's no judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I just keep telling them, I said, it's an energy that is put out there, that they realize it's a safe zone, and they may not have had anybody who could listen.
Right.
Or was willing to listen.
Exactly.
I said, I don't know why, it just is. It's the way I've always been. Yeah.
And astrology would kind of answer that question with, like, this is the calling. It's not something that you even have to think about. It's written on your spirit. It's tattooed on the soul from that perspective. And it's something that would happen to you regardless of what profession you chose. But identifying more with those professional services, taking those classes and showing up in those environments, that people are more prone to look for your help or ask for that assistance more directly, can be affirming to and useful to those natural placements. Right. Because it's not always appropriate to, like, a really good example that I ask clients who have similar placements to this. I'm like, have you gone through the waitress experience, or the waitress waiter experience? And they're like, what's that? And I'm like, it's when you're so meant to be doing this work that eventually at a restaurant, at some point, we all go through this experience where the waitress just looks at you and she just starts babbling about her life or their life, and they pour themselves out to you, and it's the most inappropriate random place, and it has nothing to do with anything other than the fact that it's you, it's who you are. Yeah. Yeah.
And I've experienced that several times.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of it's the rite of passage that I find with practitioners who do this work, is like, it's totally uncalled for. It's totally inappropriate. It just happens. And it's because it's supposed to happen. And it happens regularly, often at the most seemingly inappropriate, but always most appropriate times.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Very cool.
And if you do respect this kind of more community engagement and maybe even some philanthropic Again, like hospice service, or things where we're looking at more community involvement, more of those 11th house topics. Jupiter in Pisces in your second house of finance will reward you greatly financially for that service and for that work. So there is good money to be had there as well, especially if you delve into it wholeheartedly.
Excellent.
Yeah. Not gonna lie, Jupiter is the Lord of abundance, and having Jupiter in his home sign of Pisces in the second house of finance, it's a pretty sweet wallet you got there.
Not up to this point.
Not up to this point. This is also kind of the struggle of Saturn is, am I worthy of money? And that can be really tricky because even though in traditional astrology, seeing Jupiter in Pisces in the second, that's one of the most prosperous placements that we can actually look for financially. But because Saturn rules the chart, and because Saturn trumps Jupiter, and because Saturn is the Lord of all things restriction, no matter how much gold is thrown at your feet, Saturn will be like, I don't deserve that, and walk away from it.
Okay.
Have you had experiences like that?
Not in a long time.
Mm.
In my younger years, there was circumstances like that. But yeah, now it's interesting. So would Saturn always be that dictatorial?
Yes, it just depends on whether or not you rise to the standards of Saturn. So Saturn is a really interesting planet because archetypally, Saturn only gives what we deserve. But when we deserve it, Saturn can be one of the richest planets, even more so than Jupiter, because Jupiter can create abundance, like winning the lottery. Yeah, but that's not sustainable. Saturn creates sustainable wealth, but it's always sustainable wealth that is based on merit, that is based on the work that we do, in line with our highest good. And if we fail to live up to those standards that Saturn, those tests that Saturn puts in our way, then Saturn will be extremely cold and extremely apathetic to our plight, and will revoke the same strength that that planet can equally give. But as we mature and as we grow and as we make the correct decisions for who we are and what we are here to learn, and we do the hard work that Saturn really wants us to go through to transform, to become the more refined version of ourselves, then Saturn will naturally reward us with those opportunities and that ease, often after the hard work has been done.
Right. That makes sense. That makes sense.
Excellent.
So what about the health?
Yes, so let's talk about the health. Again, with Saturn in the first house, this is always really tricky in the first house of the body, because Saturn is the Lord of restriction, and when we find Saturn in the first house, it can often compromise the health throughout the life, but in a very specific way, in a withering way, in a depleting way, in a way that is lack that needs to be nourished, is a good way to say it. But using medical astrology, we have very specific ways of understanding the body and understanding how disease makes its way through each unique body based on where the houses are located. So having Aquarius rising, Aquarius is the body sign that rules the peripheral nerves, the skin, and the calves. And that's going to be your primary body system. It's the body system that is the most sensitive. It is the body system that is your kind of barometer for your health and wellness. So if your skin starts to get compromised in various ways, that is one of your big red flags to know that you are off of your kind of regimens. Likewise, restless legs, calf cramping or swelling in that area, but then also the idea of peripheral nerve issues like carpal tunnel, like sciatica, any of the burning, tingling, numbness that will go down the peripheral nerves and into the extremities is going to be kind of other red flags to look out for. But because the nerves are the primary body system that needs to be nourished, we're often looking at ways to self-care being things like basic cardiovascular activity for the calves. We're looking at meditation for the nerves, clearing out the nervous system from the inside out, and respecting that your level of nervous tension is often where your symptoms start. And then also eating a good variety of minerals and healthy fats to help keep the conductiveness of the nerves in the right order. Should you ignore those parts of the body, then we move into the 6th house of Cancer, where the stomach issues will start. And the digestive sensitivities from that perspective, the bloating, swelling, acid reflux, E-type upper digestive GERD, things that a stomach that is aggravated by compound stress will often kind of create, but specifically with the Aquarius rising body, if the nerves are neglected for a period of time, the stomach is the second place to sour. And then what will eventually land you in the hospital or lay you flat should you continue your lack of self-care will be Capricorn, the sign of the bones, the teeth, and the joints.
Okay, so then we go back to reverse it, you go back to the meditation, the
Right.
eating, the minerals, the cardiovascular. And so if I'm in the 6th house, I can back it up to the 1st again.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. And it becomes this kind of green light, yellow light, red light.
Right.
And so if you're at the red light, we know that we have a lot of work to do, but we have to start at that green light place. We have to start by taking care of Aquarius. And if you're at that Cancer, that yellow light, you know, that's not as bad as it could be, but definitely a sign that you've hit that kind of evolution of symptoms, that secondary layer of symptoms that aren't true dysfunction. They're just spillover from the initial kind of issues in the body. And it all comes down to nourishing that Aquarius body system and making sure that the calves are taken care of, the skin is taken care of, the nerves are taken care of. So talk to me a little bit about what you've been experiencing symptom-wise and what the health concerns are.
Well, I'm well situated in the 6th house right now. I've got cramping in the calves, stomach issues, which when I do the self-care, the stomach issues recede back. But yeah, it's extended periods of time of stress without actually recognizing that I needed to stop in self-care. So it makes 100%, like, because I do have acid reflux, as I said, the gastrointestinal sensitivities. There's a lot that's bubbling at the moment. I did have the calf cramping ease back, but then I stopped taking the magnesium, so it looks like I need to kick back onto the magnesium as I start to get that cardiovascular up and running again. Yeah.
Definitely. I think if you really wanted to take the mineralization seriously for the Aquarius, maybe even running a blood panel just to see kind of how are the vitamin D levels, how are the other kind of iron and magnesium and different mineral profiles in the blood, how are they doing, and seeing if there are any other kind of weak spots in the kind of heavy metal profiles that need to be kind of increased or managed so that Aquarius can be happy. But also remember, like, healthy fats are a big thing for the nerves as well, to make sure that the body has what it needs to protect those myelin sheaths.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Another thing that we see with the stress aspect of Aquarius is kind of nervousness, is the stomach specifically being fed things that trigger the nervous system. So as an example, like stimulants like coffee can be one of the major perpetrators of depleting Aquarius and causing a little bit too much of nervous friction. So really notice if there are any foods that calm your nervous system, if there are any foods that your body craves that just make you go like, ah, you know, that's going to be really the food choices that we're looking at to kind of settle both the physical and the metaphysical aspects of this restlessness.
Interesting.
But then also the opposite is true. So if there are foods or drinks or things that tend to wire you up, that tend to kind of compound the layers of stress or make you really jittery or anxious, you know, really pay attention to those, because that's going to be a key indicator that the body is just not okay with those types of foods.
So to back up from them.
Yeah.
Right.
And again, listen to the bones and joints in the 12th, listen to the stomach in the 6th, and listen to the nerves, the calves, the skin in the 1st.
Okay.
Awesome.
That
Any other
makes so much sense.
Good. I'm glad.
It does. It does.
Any other questions, comments, concerns before we wrap up?
You were right. It's quite mind-boggling, but really informative. Really informative.
Good.
It definitely will be of some assistance. And now I kind of understand more of, it's not just the Capricorn, you know, situation. When you look, it's just like, no, there's so much more going on. So I need to kind of look, as you said, just that looking at Aquarius, Capricorn, as opposed to doing Capricorn and then Aquarius, it makes so much sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and is it
Sagittarius?
Sagittarius, that's the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So understanding where that makes more sense is, okay, it will be more specific to what's pertinent to me, not just a generic sun horoscope.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Perfect.
Awesome.
Wow. A lot to chew on here, Sam.
It is. It's not, and this is why normally with sessions we record them. So you'll get a copy of this, and it's definitely it's the study of a life. So it's not meant to be an instantaneous thing. It's meant to be something that you keep coming back and try to crack open the mysteries with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as I said, the family trauma, the ancestral trauma, you know, and tying that in with the health, because I was a long-term smoker. But again, breaking that cycle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I quit smoking, but have health issues because of other things going on. So yeah, I can definitely see how everything's connected.
Yeah.
Right. And doing the separating and doing the healing and doing, you know, working, as you said, you think you're going to help others, but in the process of helping others, you're healing yourself and some very deep ancestral wounds.
Exactly.
Right. So, and that's what I find mind-blowing, is just like, there's so much more to this than meets the eye.
Awesome. I'm glad you enjoyed it so much. Definitely.
I did. Thank you so much, Sam.
You're very welcome. And thank you everyone who continues to watch this series. It continues to be really fun and insightful and informative, and we're getting some laughs in there too. So stay on board, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and we will continue with our series and our next chart.